Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am so excited to have our guest today, Danielle LaPorte, who I got the pleasure of meeting and seeing at a conference this past spring. And I just am so grateful that you've taken the time. Danielle, thank you so much. Please introduce yourself and tell our audience, how did you get to where you are? We all have a journey. And we all, our journey impacts not only how we show up in the world personally, but for many of my guests professionally as well. So welcome and share your journey.
Danielle LaPorte. I'm everywhere online. You can find me, just put my name in and I will be there. I talk mostly now about the intelligence of the heart, about consciousness. I'm most well known for a book and a methodology called the Desire Map that turned into a lot of things. I have a heart-centered leadership program. We have about 400 coaches, facilitators, yoga teachers, HR directors in 30 plus countries using our curriculum in different ways around resiliency and loving kindness. And how did I get to that's a long story. So
share what feels organic in this moment.
Organic in this moment is I wanted to be of service. I wanted to be of service. So my first and last real job was, this is like 100 years ago, the Body Shop running their Department of Social Inventions. I've been a publicist. I've been a house cleaner. I ran a futurist think tank in Washington, D.C. I had first level security clearance at the Pentagon. I never graduated from college. I never went to college. I lived in the States for a long time. I thought I would never come back to Canada. I'm back here. I've been here for a while. My home is here. My son is here. My love is here. My work is to hold beautiful visions of the future, no matter what's going on. So it's like a real spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so many people seek spiritual practice and find it in so many different ways. I love, I recently was revisiting the White Hot Truth, and there was so much. It's like I'm one of those people when I read, I can just like underline an entire book, right? Because so much of it speaks to me when I feel like someone has named my experience. And one of the things that really spoke to me in there is being a seeker of self-knowledge, of capital T truth, of how to define what, capital T truth and our lowercase t truth, and the various ways in which we seek that self-awareness, that healing. Were you always a seeker?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just came in like this. Want to know, I would love the answer. I felt very, I wouldn't say I was raised Catholic, but we were Catholic.
Okay.
It's like my parents were really young. My mom got knocked up in high school. So, there was lots of like youthfulness and edginess, but I went to a Catholic school. We went to mass there. I'm from a Catholic family and I wanted to marry Jesus. So there's been this call, this longing, like really, really, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, just like this longing for home.
Yeah.
And we will look in a lot of different places, dark places, light places, healthy community, not so healthy community. And now I'm comfortable being here. Like I never wanted to check out, but I'm just like, okay, this is a pretty good assignment. This is a pretty amazing time to be on this planet because it's so messed up and promising at the same time.
Well, I know from personal experience, it's almost like the more things feel messed up around me, the more I seek to find my own solace within. That's the part I can control. That's the part that I actually have agency around, because the more chaotic it is, the less I feel safety and secure out there, whatever out there is, right?
Mhm.
But I always say with my clients, there's only two things you can ever control. It's your breath and your
Mhm.
response to whatever's arising, because aside from that, what we have no control.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's true. You can't even control your feelings,
No.
really. Not really. You can control how you feel about your feelings and your relationship with your feelings, but they will come up from the subconscious self to be
Yeah.
seen. Yeah.
Everything there's a lesson, right? Even the hard moments. I recently went through probably the most challenging year of my whole life, harder than my divorce. Kind of every pillar that held me up, everything I was tethered to, all came down at one time.
Mhm.
And I had this thought. It was like my highest self knew going into it. I knew what the season was going to be. I just didn't know how hard it was going to be, but I felt it coming. My intuitive self had me prepare a little bit. But as it was, I was in the moment of it. One of the only things that really, really grounded me was, how would I respond differently if this was all in divine timing? How would I respond differently if this was all in service of my highest self? Right?
Mhm.
Like, that to me was the roadmap. And I know that seems so much part of what has been your roadmaps. How have you navigated those dark nights of the soul moments when everything feels, what do I hold on to?
Mhm. Mhm. Is that a question?
Yeah, yeah. How have you managed that? It's both a statement of, this is what we can do, but
Yeah.
how have you, and especially in the work that you do, guide to find that center in love, in.
Mm. Mm. I have a regular practice. So, what I've learned in my crises moments is that whatever works in the crisis actually works in the day to day too. You just dial it down.
Mm-hmm,
And the more consistent we can be when things aren't falling apart, we're going to have some wisdom and escrow to pull on. So, your meditation practice, your breathing practice, your how intimate you are with friends, the level of intimate conversations you're having with
mm-hmm.
the people in your life. That is a spiritual practice.
Oh yeah.
Keep that going. That is going to be what you call on, not just calling on your friends when it all falls apart, although you will, um, but calling on that sort of that exercise of referring to the heart, like what's really going on here. And
Mm-hmm,
when you do that, you can live in you will more often live in that place of what's happening is not happening to me. There isn't a God punishing me. This isn't
mm-hmm,
karmic retribution. This is, it's here. It is whatever the challenge is, whatever I've manifested, it's here. I'm probably the parent of it. I created
mm-hmm.
it, I attracted it, or I can very least parent my emotions around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be with it. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you condone it. It doesn't mean you want it to last. Like, I've wanted things. I'm just like, I'm going to come up with a strategy to change this right away. I'm just going to get out of this suffering right away. And you move into the mind, and the lesson still stays, like the anxiety or the agony, whatever it is. That's not you paying attention to it. That's you trying to make it go away.
Yeah.
You got to sit, you got to listen, go, oh, I got the message. And then there's some respect to have, which is really the game changer. Yeah.
And that getting to that level of accepting what's here, I find is one of the hardest practices.
Mm-hmm.
People will often say to me, well, but Joy, how do I accept what I don't like? Well, they didn't tell you how to like it, just stop resisting it.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
can learn to sit with.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you begin a meditation practice? Was that something that was familiar to you or very foreign when you started?
Well, officially, when I was in my 20s, I was living in Seattle, and I started going to this Buddhist Vipassana uh, retreat on Tuesday nights to meditate. And I remember the meditation teacher saying to me, well, she was just checking in, like, how's it going? And I said, well, my mind feels empty, but my heart feels dry.
Mm,
And I knew, like, okay, Vipassana wasn't my route. But at the same time, I was doing all the things. I was really got into A Course in Miracles. Louise Hay and affirmations and all that stuff, all of which I have my own more informed opinions on now. I mean, I could say, this is a bit of a flaky answer, but it's like, could say, well, when I was walking through the wheat fields by myself as a small girl, that was meditation. Like I really loved being by myself. Yeah. And then there was a period where I hit this indefinite pause on meditation. I do talk about this in White Hot Truth, where I just like, I'm coming to it with a sense of obligation. I don't want to do it. I'm kind of sitting my ass down in the cushion every day. And it was like there was a lot of resentment. And I do have this kind of authority, rebellious thing, for better, for worse. I'm not as proud of it as I used to be because it causes some troubles. But and I'm just like, I'm formally not meditating for a while, maybe forever. Maybe this isn't my jam. And my life did not fall apart, and I was still creative, and I still felt close to the divine, and I still had good friendships. And then I started to long for it. And I came back to it like really fresh, really legit, enthusiastic. And I learned that, well, I just had to be there willingly. One, and I just need to find the right practice for me. So, like when people talk to me about meditation and say, I'm not a meditator, I just kind of, I can't sit for form. I can't sit. I go, really? 4 minutes. 4 minutes every morning to change your entire life, at least your day. You don't have 4 minutes. If you don't have 4 minutes, something is wrong with your life and the way you're approaching it. But it's the same thing as relationships. People say, I'm not into commitment. And we all know those people, right? They say, I'm not into commitment. And then what happened? Like, boom, a year later, they've met this person and they're in it. And so it's the same.
And then they're so surprised. I was never into that before. What happened to me?
Right. You got to find the right person. You got to find the right meditation. Keep going until you find the one that fits. And it might just fit for a while. You might change it up.
Well, I think it's really important what you just said, because I've experienced this as well in the about 12 years since I really began to practice. I give myself permission on the days that, nope, not what I need today. And I think anytime we over attend to something we think is supposed to be good for us, we have that risk of either resenting it, like your experience, or then we're spiritual bypassing because we're checking the box. But if we're not really present for what we're there with, I still think, I would encourage anyone to force themselves through a meditation. If they're sitting in resistance the entire time, then you're kind of missing the whole purpose of meditation, which is to be present with what's arising and release resistance. And to ebb and flow, and to have compassion for ourselves when our needs might change. And maybe it looks different. Maybe it's watercolor at this particular time, or cooking, or being out in nature in a different way, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be in that same formal posture to make it efficient or successful, or, defined as I did this practice today.
Yeah. And there are things that are meditative, like being in nature and cooking. And then there is meditation. Yeah. Yeah. So lots of people say, well, I meditate when I'm on the treadmill. And I'm like, sister, that is workout. Yeah. That is therapeutic. Yeah. It's just cathartic. It's great, but it's not meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. And for some people who you work with who consistently resist stillness, how would you help them get through that? What have you found in times when stillness is not something that's coming to you naturally, right? Because this is one of the resistance. Like, I can't be still. I think I'm going to die. My body's so restless.
Most of our suffering forces us into stillness. So it's good to just be aware of that. Like, life doesn't have to give you that challenge for you to go, okay. I'm going to sit and I'm going to finally listen. I'm going to get on my knees and ask for an answer. There's that. I think a misperception in the wellness space, in the personal development space around stillness, is that we have to change our entire life and be more still people, like across the board. And that's not my experience. My experience is, I call it a stillness sandwich. You just get still in the beginning, and then you rock and roll, and you can get all your deliverables and do all that. And then still in the end, stillness sandwich. So
I like that.
you get still at the beginning of a project or a relationship or, or ceremony or the day. Just get still at the beginning of the day so that you can receive the wisdom. You can hear what your inner guidance, your higher guidance is trying to say to you, instead of going to our coach all the time or going to Instagram to see what an influencer has to say, just check in with the greatest power there is, your higher self, and then go crush it, so to speak, if that's like your thing. And then end of the day is, where was I loving? Where could I have been more loving to myself and to others? And you do that kind of inventory without judgment, right? Like it's not like, it was a real shit. It's like, okay, I see it. I see it clearly. I see it through the eyes of love. And then you set it free and you sleep. And you sleep better. I guarantee you sleep better. And it's the idea of like Shavasana. At the end of yoga class, we take that corpse pose. And I used to think, this is just like, it's all about chilling. And it's actually all the meditation teachers I've loved the most have always said, everything is leading up to this. Shavasana is actually the most important pose of all. And the idea is that you're integrating the benefits of all the work. Every posture you took, all the stretching, a little bit of sweat, you just let that all settle in. Your body moves into alignment. And I think we need to have the end of the day Shavasana to just integrate. It's the only way to get wise. Otherwise, you can wake up the next day and you're going to make the same mistakes. Yeah.
Something you just said, it's interesting. It kind of hit me in a new way, and it would be such a beautiful practice with the couples that I work with. I always encourage couples to do a weekly check-in. And non-transactional, because we know couples can get really transactional in their connection and conversation, especially as parents and busyness, and we miss opportunity for real and authentic connection. So even just, I would love 30 minutes a week, but not many couples can even commit to that. But to ask the questions during those check-ins, how did you feel loved this week? And how could I have made you feel more loved this week? And I've been doing that with my partner weekly. We had a period of a breakup, and since we've been back together, we've been really intentional about these check-ins, specifically with those two questions. It's not a time to like dump grievances. It's not a time to plan the next trip or what we're doing that weekend. It really is a container for connection, but to be open to give and receive this honest feedback. So how did you feel loved? What would have made you feel more loved? And what you said, like, oh, I could do that with myself. Same question.
Yeah.
Like that's what a beautiful practice to take what I have been suggesting with partners and really turn that self-love inward. Because as our inner critic is so loud, the self-judgment is so constant for so many people. It's hard to find that source of self-love and to be like, oh, what did I do that was loving for myself today? Oh, I went on 3 short walks. And that felt so good. Wow, I really made a commitment to just getting some fresh air and moving. That was a loving act towards my mind and my body. And I could appreciate that. I could just sit here and think about more of the things. Then I could be, what wasn't so loving to myself? And how can I attend to that without more judgment, but just with spaciousness and say, yeah, maybe that wasn't the most loving. Maybe I could try different tomorrow.
Yeah, beautiful.
So tell me about how to be loving. How did you get to this current project? And I was looking on your website of all of the things, and I love everything about it. Could you please tell the listeners who aren't familiar with what's arising for you in this self-compassion work, becoming more accepting of self, being able to incorporate our darkness and our light as a whole, complete self?
That is it. My definition of love is inclusiveness. So all of your fragmented parts of yourself. Basically, the reason we're all in therapy or we all go for coaching, the stuff we've been trying to push away, all that gets loved instead of pushed away. You got time for it. You're not asking your doubt to be faith. You're not asking your fear to be fearless. It's just, it shows up. There it is. I have space for this. I am the parent of these emotions, of these emotional states. And I have room for my brilliance and my beauty and how loving I am and how forgiving I am and all of those higher vibration, much more virtuous, you could say, energies. Yeah, soul qualities, really. And then when you do that for yourself, you have room for other people's shadow and light. And you don't always need to do it with yourself first. I mean, this is a theory that I think has not served us in the self-help space, that you have to love yourself in order to love somebody else. I've never bought that. I feel that, we all come from the same source. Can we all just get on the page? Most of us get on the page. Like, there is a oneness awareness to this. We're all in this together. And I have witnessed people who had terrible self-esteem and they went to bat for somebody else. They were really compassionate. They were really loving. They were genuinely forgiving. And that changed them, that loving act outwardly. So I don't think it matters who you love first, yourself or somebody else.
Well, and we know in the work of self-compassion field that one of the ways to develop self-compassion is to practice more compassion for others and to harness that and to turn that towards ourselves, because it's always easier to find that compassion for someone else. Right. And, I don't know if you've ever done the guided meditations from Kristen Neff on cultivating the self-compassion, but one of those ways is to think of a time of you did something kind for someone else and how it made you feel and how it must have made them feel, and to believe that you were worthy of giving that and they were worthy of receiving that. And then to think of a time when someone did something good for you and how that must have made them feel, and you in return. And that bi-directional is so important to recognize, because I think you're right. We may not always have self-love before having capacity to love for someone else, but we're all born with it, and innately it's there. It's being one with source, with the divine, however you define that.
Yeah, all that. Yes.
Yeah. And yet I find so many people get stuck accessing that because of their trauma and wounds. What would you speak to someone who says, I've had too much trauma to be able to develop self-love, or I have too much experience in shitty relationships or unkind people in my life, which is, I would say likely based on their own traumas, not your capacity to be lovable, but their challenge in experiencing based on trauma and, being trauma informed. But for people who truly don't feel like they are lovable or have that connection to that oneness that you speak of, what would you say to that?
Well, I'll tell you what the Buddha would say about that all suffering comes from identification. So I'd put a finer point on that to say all suffering comes from misidentification. So when we identify as the trauma, when we identify as what somebody said about us, when we identify as our religion, as our body, as our material possession, there will be suffering, because that's incorrect identification. It's misidentification. The reason we're here, the reason we incarnate, is to wake up to our truth, the truth, our divine nature, our Buddha nature, our original self, our soul, our heart center. And when you're there, your truth, your vastness, it eclipses all the woundedness. And it's not, of course, we're not bypassing the trauma, but you become spacious enough that you have room for your trauma, and you have room for the perpetrator, and you have room for your shame about the trauma. And, you get into it, and you're going to start to possibly feel some shame about carrying your trauma around as a story for a little bit too long. That's kept you shrunken. And you're like, wow, I am bigger. I am not the story. You are not the story. In fact, you're conscious, just being conscious that you have a story. helps you realize you're not that. You're not your feelings. You are certainly not your feelings. You are not your happiness.
Yeah.
That's why I encourage people to really be super mindful around your language around emotions. It's like the difference between saying, I am sad
Mm-hmm.
and I am angry, as opposed to, or rather than saying, I'm feeling some sadness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling angry.
I often will add to that exact reframe the words right now,
Yes, that's a good
because
one.
it
That's
keeps it really specific. Because
mm,
again, with your statement of over-identification, it's not just an identity, it feels like an eternity of it.
yes, yes, yes.
And that to add the right now lets you remember this feeling, this thought, this experience, this emotion, this situation is also impermanent. So
Yeah,
not just what you're experiencing, but the length of time with it. It's one of the things I remember reading once. Sometimes I find these sources and I don't remember where they came from, but I hold them as really good reminders. I read once that they changed in the 1980s how they did work with anorexic patients.
mm,
And it was a shift in language.
mm,
And instead of them saying, I am anorexic, it's
mm.
I have anorexia,
Yes.
right? Because to me, in that statement that I'm anorexic is like a cloak that covers them and gives no room to be anything else.
Mhm, mhm,
Versus I have anorexia, it's something I'm experiencing
mhm.
at this
Yes.
moment, at this time. It's not, doesn't define me. So we can take this power of language, which I think people underestimate the power in which we name our experiences.
Yes. People underestimate the power of words in general. Like one thing I talk about in how to be loving is obviously being intentional about the words we choose, but also the media that we ingest. And I talk about how so much of how we feel is
Mm-hmm.
actually pre-programmed.
Mm,
That culturally we're taught that if this kind of event happens, we should be really happy about this. If this kind of event happens, we should be really angry about this. And this is what happiness looks like. And this is what anger looks like. This is all training. This is all inculcated. And
mm-hmm.
and because of that, because I think, the vast majority of us are vastly programmed. We got to get really mindful. Part of waking up is to get mindful about the messaging, the visuals, the media, the music, the news, the social media that you're ingesting. So
Mm-hmm.
I, I sound like a classic new ager. It's like, I haven't watched the media or I haven't watched the news in 10 years, which is true. But it doesn't matter because I get all this stuff through what I
Right.
follow, social and all of that. So that's that's not a, a pride spot anymore. Um, Although I don't watch the news on television. When I go to the dentist, my dentist has a TV on the ceiling. And every time I'm just like, why do you do this? It's
Mm-hmm.
torturous enough to be like, maybe
You're doubling people's anxiety who already have anxiety about the
exactly.
dentist, and now you've got to watch what's happening in the world. That would not be relaxing to me either.
You got to watch what's not happening in the world that people want you to believe is happening in the world. Um, but I've gotten really mindful about music because that's like a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And the subconscious, I think this is an easy way to understand it. Like the subconscious is listening to everything that you're taking in, that you're saying, that you're hearing. And it's not mature enough to filter because it's not conscious. It's like your subconscious self is not a mature, luminous adult.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gremlin, or it's an inner child that's unhealed. It's some repressed something that's in the basement of
Yeah.
your soul. So it's not going to be able to decipher. So it is hearing and it's just believing whatever shit you feed it or
Yeah.
whatever nourishment you feed it. So now if I hear a song, even if it's some beautiful, melodic, loved it, classic, hit, whatever, love the person who's singing it. But if it's giving me this message that there's only heartbreak and I'm never going to get over it, or hi, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me. Look how hypnotic that
Hmm.
pop song is. That's poison.
Yeah, it's
So
toxic.
it's super toxic. Fast forward, fast forward, delete it. Yeah.
Hmm. It's so powerful to look at the what we take in. And I often talk about this with clients around our thoughts. How much would you hold on to the thoughts if you really truly understood that you are ingesting them like
Yes.
you would fast food? Right? You wouldn't have
Yes.
you if you saw a whole buffet table of fast food, even no matter how good it looked, there would be something that would click on and say, even though that looks enticing, I'm really going to feel like shit afterwards. And it's not going to be worth it. There's going to be a tipping point in which no matter how much your ego wants it, how much, your taste buds want it, you're going to say, there's going to be some consequence for me ingesting this.
Here's a great way to think about this. Energy follows thought. I mean, if anybody listening, if the only thing you get out of this this is it. This is the diamond. Energy follows thought. Energy follows thought. I could just repeat that 108 times. Energy follows thought. So the question to help really utilize this is, what's the energy of your thoughts?
Yeah.
So your thought about your body, your thought about your past, your thought about your future, your thought about them, your thought about all of it. What's the energy of that? Is it just a warm, friendly thought? Awesome. We want warm, friendly thoughts. Is it a critical, judgmental, death? Is that the energy of thought? That's not the vibe we want going on.
Right.
The visual that I often give is that we have to, well, the invitation is to see thoughts as these little spheres, almost like these little marbles that hang out in your auric field, the energy field around you, this bubble that everybody has. I mean, this can be measured with
Mm-hmm.
electromagnometers and all these things. You got a vibe, everybody got one. And your thoughts have an energy, they hang out in your bubble. And those energies, that one thought starts to create a cluster and it becomes an energy cloud.
Yeah.
And sometimes those clouds, you could say, are really positive. This is an energy cluster of gratitude and compassion and generosity and love. And that is the sign that you're walking down the street with. People will feel that, and you will attract more of that. And an
Mm-hmm.
important distinction here is you will attract more of that from yourself. It's going to pull out a certain kind of thinking. And then the opposite is true.
Yeah.
Shitty thoughts, critical thoughts, they cluster, they become the dark little clouds as you walk down the street. And there you go.
And it's so much easier said than done to not
Yes.
ingest the energy of those thoughts.
Yeah.
And yet we know that those thoughts are also part of being human. So
Mm.
to someone who's listening is like, Danielle, that sounds really beautiful. And I'm so happy for you that you can, really help organize your auric field of your energy clusters. But I can't do that. That's not going to work for me. Because I know people are out there listening. I've had clients who get stuck here. I've been there myself. We're all human. We're all experienced this. It is easier said than done.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to someone who's like, I've tried, and those thoughts and that energy, it follows me like a dark cloud. I
Keep
can't do it. I'm so happy you can do it, but it's not for me.
It's not for you. Okay.
Well, yeah, how would you respond to someone who really
I,
believes
I would sit in the
that energy?
discomfort. I would sit in the discomfort with that person. Okay, you think it's not for you? Okay. And what would happen if you continue to think that? What would happen if you allowed that thought to continue to rule? And then we could go down that path, and it's probably pretty bleak. Okay. So you don't have to believe it, but just humor me. What would happen if we chose a more loving thought, a more hopeful thought? And what would happen if you allowed that thought to continue? What might the path look like? A lot better. So then you choose.
Yeah.
Because I am I love to be a cheerleader. I love to be a cheerleader. I have a membership. I cheerlead people all the time. Say, love, you can do this. You got this. And there does come, there's a point and there's a certain kind of energy from people where cheerleading is not the best response. You sit in the space of their free will. You can walk them through some scenarios of where different choices may lead, and they're going to make their choices, and you hold space.
Yeah.
And they may leave your treatment room, they may leave your Zoom call, they may leave the cafe, and I would bet that 3 days later, 3 weeks later, 3 years later, when they're in pain, they're going to go, huh, there's something to this thing around energy and my thoughts.
Yeah.
And my observation, when I was doing one-on-one business strategy work, never called myself a coach because I'm not, but it's a gross generalization. 50% of people were motivated by a beautiful vision of the future, and they were going to change on behalf of that. The other half of people were motivated by pain, and they just weren't in enough pain yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's powerful when we can recognize our ability to choose the thought that serves us best, even though all the thoughts are going to come in. And, I love to challenge people and say, well, that's not what my tendency is. Okay, that's fine. You're human. This is just what the mind does. Your mind is doing what the mind does. Welcome to being human. You're no different than me. I've just had more practice at recognizing what to do there. I like visuals, and I like, kind of play on words. And so when I guide what to do with the thoughts, I tell people it's like, imagine you're at a train station. And here in the Bay Area, some of the BART stations are in the middle of the freeway. So I like that visual as well, because you can imagine like being on this BART platform with like 6 lanes of cars in each direction. So it's a good visual for not just the train of thoughts, the train that's pulling into the station, but the chaos and the distraction and the noise around us as those cars on the freeway. And so often that train pulls into the station and you hop on board, not even knowing if it's the right train in the direction you want to be going in, or even if, that's your intentional choice. And so I will always say, like, keep your feet firmly planted on the ground, notice what's arising around you, and just look at the cars of the train. Oh, look, that's an interesting thought. That's an interesting thought. Oh, look at that one. And you can consciously choose which one to literally step on board with.
Yeah.
Just because it pulled into the station doesn't mean you got to jump on board.
Yeah. Great metaphor, great visual. And also to check your intention. Like, lots of us want our life purpose, right? We want that sense of direction. I think if we just get clear on, I want to live a life of loving kindness. I want to embody compassion. I want to embody joy. And we really get in alignment with really that higher vibration, with that virtue. I want to be that. I don't know what it's going to look like every day. Lots of times I feel incapable. This feels like a tall order. That's okay. Aim high, aim for love, aim for love. And then you will start to think different thoughts.
Yeah.
It's in a way, like, as much as I am into let's think loving thoughts. I mean, I have a whole process in how to be loving about choosing higher quality thinking. But really, really, it's about a commitment to an energy, really. It's really about a commitment to loving kindness. And the mind will start to fall in line with the heart. I mean, our problem collectively is we really do have it in reverse. And I still do this all the time, where there's something I want to change or there's some kind of bind, and I'll immediately go into strategy mode. Well, what should I do? And I want to do all the things. And I've had so much therapy. I go, okay, we should do this little exercise. We should do this thing. I should start the conversation with this. All these tools we get in therapy that are beautiful, But I do that before I just, oh, what's my heart got to say here? What would
Mm.
really, if we all just last, I know it's so cheese, but it's like, if we would just
Mhm.
all ask ourselves, what would love do right now?
Yeah.
Love for myself, love for the other person, love for the collective. We wouldn't need 7 steps to get through every conversation.
Yeah. And it's an embodiment. It's not a cognitive, process. It's that embodiment. One of the ways I think about that is, am I in force or flow?
Yeah.
Right? Am I coming from effort or essence? Right? Kind of these cliches, but whether that's happening in my personal life, in my business, you know what it feels like when it's coming from force or effort. Something's not in alignment there.
Yeah.
When it's coming from flow or my essence, that's where that heart center is, who's in the driver's seat, not ego, not need for money or followers or whatever, like the ego is going to define for us as quote success, but what feels in alignment. And I'm wondering if you have this experience too of people who have that desire but either have never embodied that, so they don't know that it's possible to exist for them, right? Or they wouldn't know what that embodiment of love feels like because maybe at this point in their life, they
Mhm.
wouldn't recognize it, right? How
Mhm.
would you speak to that? Because sometimes these things can be pretty elusive
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Yes.
conceptual.
Uh, well, this is where I think cheerleading does come in, which is, I would say, I know, and you know on some level what love is. You know what love is, and go practice, and you'll know when you feel it. You'll know when you experience it. Um, yeah, we have to lean on each other. Okay, Jory said, I know how to love. I just got to go practice. Okay. And like all virtue needs to be practiced. Like
Yeah.
we play around with like, oh, I'm in love. And we go, oh, that wasn't really love. And I play around like, I'm going to be generous. Oh, I was kind of just doing that for the good PR, and then we practice a little more like, ah, that was loving. I felt
Mm-hmm.
loved. I was loving. I surprised myself with how accepting I was. I was loving. Oh, this generosity thing, this feels good. I actually, you know what? It feels so good. I don't need anything in return. And
Yeah.
boom, you hit the zone of like, real light, real love. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to name, because I think, again, this is patterns that I see with my clients, and we don't have to be fully healed from those wounds in which we got disconnected to be able to fully embody love and be the source of our own healing for love, right? And I just felt compelled to share that because I think this is one of those false assumptions on, if what you're describing, Danielle, is enlightenment or peace or spiritual, having been spiritual, let's just like name it for what it is. We can all have a lot of fucking trauma and
Yeah. You
be
are
the source
busted.
of that own love. Yeah.
That's right. You are busted. Proceed with emotional intimacy. Everybody has tremendous amounts of shadow content, of unhealed stuff, of an inner child that needs gentleness and attention, all those things. CEOs of companies, prime ministers, mothers of many children, people who are deeply in love, we all got the dark goods. And
Mm-hmm.
you proceed and you heal. Every single relationship is a vessel for healing. Every interview, every relationship at work, every marriage, even the ones that so-called fall apart, everything
Mm-hmm.
is an opportunity for you to find out how loving you are and how lovable you are.
Yeah.
And the prayer is, I hope you get that. I hope you get that in every interaction. You're just like, oh, I'm I am loving. I can be so loving. Oh, wow, I am loved. And some healing just happened. And we're all dancing with like, bag this. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to walk. I mean, I wrote a book about love. I just stormed out of the park last week from my guy. And I just like, I'm done with this conversation. And, here I am. Here we are.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe that was a loving act for your own self-care in that moment, right? Because I think this is a question too of, and I just had a conversation with a client about this morning regarding anger.
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, anger has been a really, really repressed emotion, no, not given space for it. Can I be loving within anger? And then there's the real tricky part of where, for some people, anger was so familiar that that became what love looked like, and it can be really confusing. Because
Right.
I think the image that I want to clarify that you're not saying we need to walk around just being these generous, all loving, completely zened out, practicing equanimity right and left. That's not going to be possible. So thank
Mm.
you for sharing. You sort that apart. Like, you can still be loving and angry. It doesn't mean you have to always.
Well, you will still be loving and angry.
Right.
Like, it's
Right.
just how it's going to happen because human, because duality, because all this stuff, the unhealed content that we're walking around with all the time. Um, what was the question?
Well, just, to remind people in your experience of, we're not going to be these Zen like loved beings where we don't feel other emotion but
Oh,
love.
yes. Okay. Yes. And here's the thing. You have to love your anger or it will keep trying to get your attention. Your anxiety, your fear, your arrogance, your greediness, whatever like your shtick
Yeah.
is, your dark shtick, you have
Yeah.
to like, I think in our space, this idea of, I think I talked about this where we met at the relationship conference. The idea that we should be overcoming our fears is really damaging, actually. Fear is something that we each create. I look at it, the most useful metaphor for me is like my fear is my mind baby and all
Mm,
my other things. I created it. And why you don't want to ostracize things that you create.
mhm.
They will keep coming back to ask for your attention. So the anger will get more angry. You'll get more triggerable. And your soul is going to set it up to give you occasions to really master this. It's going to create something where you could really be angry and you're going to choose. You're going to blow or you're going to respond differently, with all of
Yeah.
your love and your wisdom and all those things. So no overcoming, embracing, no rejection of those parts of yourself. Just like I'm this. I think, when we get enlightened, which I think when you get enlightened, you get to get off this ride. Uh, I think one layer of that is you just say, oh, I have an ego. So what?
Mhm.
It's there. It's there. We proceed with wanting the best for everybody. We
Yeah.
proceed to be loving grown-ups. We watch our tone. We ask for forgiveness. We apologize. I was just talking to a woman. She's one of our heart-centered leaders, and she goes into corporations and talks about forgiveness. She's very committed to Course in Miracles teachings. And she said the response where she goes into a boardroom and says, forgive people because we're all connected and because it's what love does. Nobody really nods or leans into that. But
Mm.
when she says, forgiving someone else will bring you peace, everybody's really down with that. It's kind of like, forgiveness works for me.
Yeah.
And that's a training. That's a training that it all has to work for me. It might not work for you. Love can be okay with that. Like,
Yeah.
it's messy. Your partner's going to let you down 900 times a week. And we still have capacity to be love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to accept that versus judge when it arises. I remember when my daughters were young, and you know drop off at elementary school in the morning parking lot was time for lots of moms to commune and chit chat. And there was this one friend that I had, and out of nowhere, she was across the parking lot and she just kind of yelled, she goes, someone's going to disappoint you today. And then she followed up by, you're going to disappoint someone today. And we just decided to embrace that. And so for the rest of the school year, we'd teach other, and we're like, go disappoint someone today. It just neutralized that we're human. You know, we're going to have these ups and downs. Can we not judge when it arises? Can we not over attach to it? Can we not have that inner critic? Oh, why did I do that? And then ruminate all day long that one thing that I said that I'm, you know, either got misinterpreted. It's just, to me, it all comes down to acceptance that we're human. We have this ego. We have these wounds. We have these traumas. We have all this beauty and light and love. And it's the paradox. We are all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And can we integrate versus parse out and over identify, right back to the Buddha of over identifying with the parts that we don't feel good with and think that's who we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct identification. Correct
Yeah.
identification. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, the work that you're doing is so beautiful. I so appreciate the light and the honesty you bring to your work. I think it's really refreshing to give people the full reminder. It's always a practice. It's always available to you.
Mm-hmm.
Choose a thought that serves you best. You know, I talk a lot about with my clients, like reframing situations, even looking back at childhood wounds and not over personalizing what your mom or dad or someone did, but maybe getting curious what was going on for them that might have led to that. Maybe it wasn't about you, that you now have spent your whole life having an identity wrapped up in this, you know, one signature moment in which your belief systems and values were identified. And how could we reframe that from a place of compassion? Self-compassion for yourself, compassion for someone else's pain. How might you respond differently if you focused on, wow, what was that emotion driving that behavior versus, wow, that behavior was really shitty,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we can choose that interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
How's that going to make you feel to choose that?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. Compassion in therapy. Yes. 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 Yeah.
Yes. Is there any favorite practice, just as parting wisdom for someone who says this all sounds beautiful? What's the one thing, Danielle? Where do I start? I know you mentioned just some stillness in the beginning of our conversation, but now that we wrap it up, what would be the one thing?
The one thing, super simple, and this surprisingly to me has been what a lot of people have brought up from the book, from How to Be Loving. You're in that moment with somebody and they've pushed your button, you're feeling triggered, like you're not digging, respecting whatever they've got going on. And this is so simple. You just say, oh, I've done that before. Because you've probably been that before. Maybe, I'm sure we've all lied before. We were all late before. We've all been a little out of line, a little manipulative, whatever it is. And maybe you did that a long time ago and you've really made lots of progress and you would never, ever do that again, but you did it before. And the immediate response, I think, for the ego mind is it relaxes. You instantaneously step onto some common ground.
Mm-hmm.
The judgment starts to diffuse. And sometimes you can even laugh a bit at like, yes. Oh, they're scared. I did that when I was scared. Oh, I did that when I didn't know any better. And you listen
I
to.
love that. I love that. And it makes me feel that it's the path to interconnectivity.
Yes.
That we're all connected. If what you did, I've done before, we now, oh yeah, we're all human. Oh yeah, that's what being humans do.
Mm-hmm. And you can, if you really pay attention, most of us can identify, like, what's your common critical phrase, let's say, that you say about other people? Like I used to say, oh, Jane's all about Jane. And I realized I was all about me in a lot of situations. So there's a common thing that kind of picks at you about other people. You've done that before.
Yeah.
And it's usually unresolved shame for having been that way ourselves.
Yeah.
And we go, oh, little Danielle. Yeah.
Oh, the things that we project out
Yeah.
that we have unresolved and difficult to integrate within ourselves. Yeah, but this journey of being human, as I continue to have different iterations of challenges and continue to fall back on practices, I feel more and more embodied in the practice of self-love. This is something that I've had to come to over this past year in my life. So I really feel like this conversation, just for me personally, has been spot on for what reminders and, as a therapist, what I always teach. And yet we all know it's still always a practice. It's not about how well we know it cognitively. It's what are we doing to integrate and practice. It's like, it's not easy. Why it's a practice. We don't call yoga a yoga perfect. It's a yoga practice. It's not a meditation perfect. It's a meditation practice, right? Because we're constantly needing to build that muscle. Remember it's there, integrate it, be forgiving.
Love.
I love it. Thank you so much, Danielle. I've loved this conversation. There's so much beauty in what you shared and in the way you described what really is quite simple. We overcomplicate it.
Yeah, me too.
So thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us today and for the wisdom and the work that you're sharing with the world. If this episode spoke to you all, I would love a rating, review, and share so we can help others journey forward to more love and loving act and to be loving in our lives. And I think what the world is most desperately craving right now is we heal multiple levels of consciousness and our planet. And this is the answer. This is the medicine.
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.